Not specifically. No, I have a picture in my head, but I'm sure it's not right. I can just picture Uzzah reaching up to steady it, you know, but I'm not sure how it's supposed to be carried.
Anybody remember? You said it, Jason. Yeah, on poles, on the shoulders of men. You know, that way nobody's touching it, right? Because the poles go in through the clasps and they put them on their shoulders and they're carrying the ark that way. So it's a more holy way to carry it. And he covered in, wood covered in gold. They had it on a cart that was being pulled by even when David was moving it, they were pulling it with the cattle. So it's the oxen. The oxen stumbled, and that's why Uzzah reaches out to keep the ark from falling off. You know, we think, well, he was trying to protect the ark, but you know, God was already ticked off at the way they were moving it and showing His holiness. So David leaves it with a guy named Obed-Edom, and he really prospered while the ark was with him. And David thinks, oh man, you know, David was kind of mad about the whole deal, but you know, after Obed-Edom was prospering so much, he thought, well, I really should get this thing into Jerusalem, so we can prosper that way. And so he goes, and of course we know that he does it the right way that time, and he makes their big worship service during the parade, and he dances in his skivvies. And who was it that despised David in his dancing?
Saul's daughter.
Yeah, Saul's daughter. Michal is the way ESV says it. Yeah, Michal. And so from that day forward, you know, God showed His displeasure for her scorn of His worship by making her barren from that day forward. So it's a good reminder to us not to scorn other people's worship. Probably if people are stripping down in our worship services, probably as pastors in our context, it's probably not proper, but we definitely want to leave room for other people's expressions in worship.
Why did they strip down like they?
Yeah, I don't know.
Just wonder.
You know what I mean? Where do they see like us?
There might have been less inhibition in some of those ways. You're
freedom, I guess. You know. I mean.
Well, I mean, there's something too, like when Job was afflicted, but then he stripped himself and shaved his head. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Something there.
Isaiah, when we get into Isaiah, he prophesied in the nude for years.
Like 3 or 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, you know, that just doesn't really work in our culture, and so it's probably some cultural things there. Yeah, pretty intense.
Might have those other stripping shoes when you stand on holy ground. I don't know, something there with the Spirit of the Lord.
Yeah.
I'm just reaching for straws.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we can talk a little bit more about 1 and 2 Samuel. Saul, let's see, how did he first meet Samuel?
Donkeys.
Yeah, he's searching for his lost donkeys, right? And I don't know if we talked about this at all, but who was it that had the idea to go look for Samuel? Maybe he could help them. Yeah, it says servant. It says, well, there is a holy man, you know, it's a seer, yep, which is another word for prophet, right? One who sees things. And so Saul's response is, well, who is this man? He doesn't know anything about him, right? And this is the judge over the land, and he's a great prophet. He's not living far away from Saul, and Saul doesn't know anything about the guy. He doesn't know where he is or anything. It's the servant who has to lead him there. And, you know, those are some of the clues. We sometimes think about the richness of 1 and 2 Samuel. There's so many subtle clues there. But that's one of the clues that the author is telling us, that Saul's a big dum-dum. You know, he did some great things as king, killing some Philistines, which he was supposed to do, but he was pretty spiritually obtuse, didn't even know where the holy man was. Of course, Samuel anoints him, and he's just going to go back to farming. And we remember when it comes, there's a number of different sort of anointments of him. when it comes to anoint him as king again, he's hiding in the baggage, right? He's a foot taller than everybody else, and yet he's afraid. You know, he doesn't want to be anointed in front of everybody, and so they have to go find him. And, then you know, when he's anointed that second or third time, I suppose it is. After that, what did Samuel tell him to go and do? No, before he ever became king. Like, he gets anointed as king, and then Samuel, you know, what do you do when you're the king? You know, there's never been a king before. How do you just take control of the country, right? That's kind of weird. Like, well, I'm king now, but what's a king of Israel do? So Saul he tells him just do whatever your hand finds to do. And so Saul naturally goes back to farming. That's what he had done before. He becomes a farmer again. And then do you guys remember the incident that really thrust him? And it's the Spirit of God that comes upon him. And so, you know, this is God really, really, really making Saul the king over Israel. I mean, it's one thing to have a group of people gather around you and say, okay, now you're our king, but you still got 12 tribes and, you know, hundreds of thousands of people to rule, and there's never been a kingship. They don't have any, you know, real system for following a king. And so you really don't have a united nation yet. You don't really have people following you yet. And he just goes back to farming. And then, Jason, you remember? No, Naboth doesn't come up. That's way later with Elijah.
Or whoever it is, the guy says, you guys poked out your eye.
Yeah.
Deal. And Saul gets, maybe that's it. Gets all ticked off, cuts up the ox, and says, you guys are going down. Takes care of business.
It's the Ammonites that are threatening this town of Jabesh.
Out your right eye.
The Jabesh Gileadites, yep. And so that was the terms of peace. They were gonna kill them all unless they could take their,
which I heard
eye.
Was the eye that you could see with. One time, because they say your shield's over there. Your battle eye is what supposedly, you know, that's a secret. I don't know.
For sure. Yeah, without your right eye, you're totally ineffective as a soldier. Same thing with, you know, cutting off people's thumbs. You know, you're rendering them ineffective for military warfare, or much of anything. And so they're willing to accept the terms, but they say, well, give us a week or something like that, you know, to consider it. And Saul gets word and kills the oxen. That's the end of farming for him. Just like you think of Elisha, you know, killing his oxen. This is the end of farming for Saul. Sends a peace to every tribe and tells them to come to battle, or else, you know, the message is, or else this will happen to your oxen, you know, or maybe you. And so I
feel like that was like Saul's finest hour. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was from the Spirit of God. You know what I mean? Because it took like serious guts, man. If you guys don't come and help us,
for sure. I mean, Saul is a mixed character. This is, I think, the epic moment for Saul that the Bible, you know, of course, we talked about selective history the first week or two, and authors just choosing a few incidents to try and give us a picture of these guys. And we see that Saul really was big and tall and could be tough. And then he withered in so many other moments. But and the Bible gives us a description of the victories that Saul had. And so, you know, the main thing that an Israelite king needed to be able to do was to kick the tail of the Philistines. And for a season, he was able to do that. Or this is the Ammonites, I guess. And remember, how did the Jabesh Gileadites, maybe more than one story, how did they show their loyalty to Saul? They were kind of lifers in terms of their loyalty to Saul. They were committed to him. The Philistines killed Saul and his 3 sons. You guys remember that, you know, Saul, how did Saul die? He fell on his own sword, and his sons fell on their sword. You know, that his armor bearer wouldn't do it, but so he killed himself. Remember where it was at? The location? It's on Mount Gilboa. And so on Mount Gilboa, he dies. And then the Philistines, you know, they I think, cut off his head or something like that. They desecrated his body. I think they maybe hung it up on a wall. And, you know, that's what you would do, you know, scare off other enemies and to celebrate your victories. You know, desecrate bodies or show them off as trophies. And so people from Jabesh Gilead, they went and, at great risk to themselves, they went and rescued their bodies and gave them proper burial. Kind of a big deal. Anybody remember, this is a story later, this must be in 2 Samuel, fast forwarding a little bit. Remember what David did to some of Saul's family? We know that he honored Jonathan and Mephibosheth, but there's a lady that cried out for justice. I'm forgetting the exact details now, but because her sons had been killed by Saul, and so David enacts justice. He gathers 7 descendants of Saul's, kind of a grisly affair, all brothers, and he has them killed and hung up. And the mom of these sons, she's chasing the birds away and that sort of thing. Finally they take the bodies down and give them a burial. So David can be pretty ruthless sometimes. And let's see, who was the commander of Saul's army? Let's remember, pretty key guy to get down. Well, you're maybe thinking of the commander of David's army, but it's Abner. Abner was the commander, and who was the commander of David's army? Joab, yeah. And Joab was one of the sons of, what was his mom's name? This appears over and over again in the text. One of the sons of Zeruiah. Remember, there were 3 sons of Zeruiah. Anybody remember the other 2?
Is that the top 3 mighty men guys?
Yeah, they were among the mighty men. I don't remember if they were the top 3 or not. So there's Joab, and then his 2 brothers. You're thinking of it. There's Abishai and Asahel. Remember how Asahel died? I think we talked about this last week.
Back of the stick show.
Yeah, yep, the back of the spear. Abner killed him. Remember, he was chasing Abner, and Abner said, "Go chase the young guys," and I could never look your brother in the eye again, if I were to kill you. Asahel, he was as fast as a gazelle, and he kept chasing him, so Abner killed him. So Joab, naturally is nursing a grudge against Abner. And eventually kill him too. And it was Samuel. There were 2 key moments that were really.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. Interesting. So Abner was the one that killed
Asahel. Yep.
And he was Joab's little brother.
Yeah. Yep.
A good movie.
Yeah, The Mighty Men. I'm sure. There's a book. I've got a buddy that used to go to our church, moved to Missouri, and he's told me a couple of times about some book about the Mighty Men.
Who was the 3rd brother?
Asahel and Abishai. Abishai. And remember, I'm kind of bouncing around a little bit, but what were the 2 emblematic incidences in Saul's life that displayed God's rejection of him and his rebellion against the Lord? Remember which 2 bad things he did? Number of bad things beyond that.
I don't know about emblematic. I remember he didn't. I don't know if this is what you're looking for, but I know he killed, or when he didn't. They didn't kill everything, right?
Yeah, yep, that's the one. Yep, that was.
Didn't kill the sheep and all that stuff. They took it right.
Yep.
He's supposed to wait for Samuel for the.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's the second one. Yeah, I think those are the two low points for him. Didn't kill Agag, which Jackson mentioned, of the Amalekites, and then kept the sheep. And of course, he's kind of slippery, like a lot of people are. And I was saving them to sacrifice them to the Lord, but that really didn't matter because God had somehow revealed to him that this was supposed to be everything was devoted to destruction. And that's not the case in every battle. Some battles God tells them to take plunder, and they're able to take some things for themselves. In some battles, we're under the harem. It's kind of the Hebrew word that gets used, but they were devoted to destruction, like Ai and Jericho. Even during the conquest, they were able to take plunder from some of the cities, but others of them they weren't. And so he keeps back the plunder, and then I think what you mentioned, Zach, the making the sacrifice. To me, it's such a vivid picture of what so many people do in the Christian life too. Of he's waiting. It was common to make a sacrifice before the battle. You want the Lord to be pleased with the battle and to have His favor upon it. And he was waiting and waiting and waiting for Samuel, and Samuel's not coming, and it's a week or whatever. And finally, he thinks the soldiers are beginning to scatter. And he thinks the time is ripe now to go to war, otherwise they're going to miss the opportunity. And so he goes ahead and makes the sacrifice himself. And, as he's finishing up the sacrifice, here comes Samuel. What have you done? Kind of a thing. And it just feels like in the Christian life, I know I've had this experience, that there's some things that just seem so desperate, like how are we going to pay this bill? Or, how am I going to resist this temptation? And we wait and wait and wait for the help of the Lord, and it just seems like it's never going to come, right? We're never going to be able to pay this bill, and so maybe you go and get a dumb loan, or maybe you give in to some temptation because you think, well, I can never resist this. But I think what we can tell our people, and I think even the stories like this can be illustrative, in counseling or in discipleship, is wait just a little bit longer. God's going to come through. He always does. For those that look to Jesus, God always comes through. We might feel desperate and we don't know how it's going to happen, but his help always comes. When we think about 1 Corinthians 10:13, no temptation is seized you, except what is common to man, and God is faithful and just, and He provide a way out from it. So there's always a way out. So we don't want to give in too soon before the help comes. I think a lot of people don't experience God's power and provision because they don't have any self-control to wait, and they maybe haven't learned to wait yet. And so we want to learn to wait, encourage people to wait, and as the longer you wait, and the more often you begin to see God's provision and help over temptation, then you begin to rely upon it and trust it, and all of a sudden you're walking in faith, and you don't even know it. It's just how you do life. And so that's a help for us there.
Sounds like for Saul, I hadn't thought about this before, I don't think, but when you were saying that, seems like with Saul, that God was kind of a lucky rabbit's foot too, just like the ark, because he's like, we have to do this in order to win the battle, so let's do it. You know what I mean? Kind of just like, and then Samuel, let me say, God desires obedience, not sacrifice.
Yeah, a great verse that gets repeated in the New Testament. Well, who was Saul's oldest daughter that had been promised to David, but not given to him? Not Michael, but Michael's the
one he wanted.
Well, there's another one. Michael's the one he got. Close. Merab, M-E-R-A-B. Yep, was given to David. And then he eventually got Michael. Saul begrudgingly gave her to him, only at the cost of what? David wasn't a wealthy guy.
Foreskins.
Yeah, right. 100 Philistine foreskins. He brings 200 to Saul, just to show his manliness, I guess. And so he wins Michael. He should have won Merab just by killing Goliath, but he has to get these Philistine foreskins besides. What did David do with Goliath's head? Where did he take it? Anybody remember? Jackson took it after he kills Goliath. Yep. He takes it to Jerusalem, but I think one of the things that's helpful to see is that it wasn't Jerusalem yet at that point. It's still Jebus, so it was the city of the Jebusites. But he took it to Jebus. I don't know what he did with it there. The battle was in the valley of Elah. They lined up, and it's common practice to if your two armies didn't want to go to war, you could get a a man who would stand between the two. You know, you get these two warriors, and it was a practice that they did back then. I don't know if whoever lost ever submitted to the other army. I can't imagine they would. But at any rate, they had this competition so that the two armies wouldn't have to go to war. Goliath is killed. Where was his sword taken to?
It came up later. Where was it in the temple or something?
Yeah, and it's not the temple proper yet, but yeah, the tent of meeting, or the tabernacle, or whatever it was called then. It's
Remember David got it later?
Yeah, it's at Nob, right? The priests were at Nob, and David, while David's fleeing Saul, you know, he goes to the priests at Nob, and he asks for Goliath's sword. They ask for a weapon, and they're like, well, all we have here is Goliath's, and David says there's none like it. And so he takes Goliath's sword, and the priests also feed him, right? Remember the food that they gave him? We didn't get, this is the next passage in Mark that we didn't have time to get to. Yeah, the bread of presence, or the showbread they gave David. And so, of course, that was David showing that that was Jesus. You know, he uses that illustration to show that Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. He said, look, even David did what wasn't lawful. He ate the bread in an emergency. And look, my disciples and we can eat on the Sabbath grain. We can pick grain and pluck it because I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. And the rules didn't apply to Jesus in the same way, because he was bringing something entirely new. And the priests at Nob, how did they end up getting killed? All but one of them. Yeah, and who was the guy that carried out the bloody deed?
It's going to be Abner, right?
No, this time it's Dag the Edomite. Dag the Edomite. And David, you know, when he hears about the slaughter, he says, you know, I knew Dag had overheard. You know, he was apparently there at Nob for some reason, and he knew what they had done, and so he had a premonition apparently that it was going to be
Probably
trouble.
one of those things he left thinking that wasn't good.
Yeah, right. So 85 priests are slaughtered, and which one priest didn't die? Anybody remember? Abiathar? And Abiathar is spared or escapes, and he runs back and tells David what happened. And of course, you know, it's all the fulfillment of prophecy, because you guys remember that the prophecy that was given either directly to Eli or to Samuel, I forget now, but the prophecy was that, I think it was directly to Eli, that not us, you know, all of your descendants, you know, would be killed, except one, and he would be spared to weep his eyes out. And so Abiathar was that one that was spared. And he became the high priest. Of course, you know, the interesting thing in Mark, you know, the passage that we're coming up to is that Abiathar is called the high priest, you know, that permitted David to eat. He technically wasn't the high priest yet. It seems like it's kind of looking forward to when he would become the high priest. And so I think the NIV translates it. I was reading the commentary on Mark this week that, you know, in the ESV it says how David entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the high priest. And so, and I think the ESV says in the days of Abiathar the high priest. So it's kind of, you know, we sort of understand that Abiathar is not technically the high priest, but it's in the days of Abiathar, you know, when, right before he became the high priest. It's not really a problem, but it's kind of interesting when you read the Greek text.
So all the priests were killed because it was prophesied that they were going to be killed. That's crazy. Yeah,
it's sad and cool at the same time to see God's word being fulfilled. Yeah, this was the end of the Eli dynasty. You know, Eli was the high priest. His sons were high priests. Eli was the judge. And so now there's only one left. The Eli dynasty is hanging on by a thread. And how did it officially end? What became of Abiathar? Do you guys remember? Yeah, or banished him. I don't think he actually killed him. But yeah, you nailed it. You always nailed it. Yeah, and even when Abiathar was high priest, you remember there's kind of an unusual arrangement with the high priests. Remember that there was another high priest, so there's kind of this co-high priesthood. Remember who the other high priest was? Yeah, Zadok. Yeah, so these two guys, Zadok and Abiathar, are serving as high priests. And I believe in the prophecy to Eli, it says, I will raise up, another priest, something like that. And of course, Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of that. And, Zadok, we talk a lot about the near and the distant fulfillments of prophecy. Zadok was the near fulfillment of that prophecy. And so you can see it's down to one priest. And then even while he's serving, there's two of them. And eventually Abiathar was banished. And why was Abiathar banished? Jackson, do you remember?
Because he decided.
Yeah, not Absalom. Close. Who? Close. There's so many.
One of those guys.
So many names that are so similar. Yeah, it's Adonijah. Remember that Adonijah tried to succeed his father as king by throwing a coronation party for himself. But David on his deathbed wasn't going to have it. He had arranged for Solomon to be king. And so, and Adonijah had also, who else was on his side that was really powerful? Remember? Yeah, Joab is on his side. And there were some other dudes on his side. And Nathan and Bathsheba and Solomon, they weren't invited. And so and whoever becomes king, the people loyal to the other person are likely to be killed. And so it really becomes a matter of life and death for those folks. Let's see, who was Solomon's commander of his army? Jason, you know it, don't you? Benaiah, you pointed out that he was a bad dude himself. Bad in the sense of kick butt. Mm-hmm. Benaiah was a Kerathite. He was the chief bodyguard for David, and then he was promoted after David's death, of course, and became commander of Saul's army, or of Solomon's army. How did Joab die? Benaiah, but where was he at when he was killed? Remember? Yeah, he was clinging to the horns of the altar, which was a plea for clemency. You can't kill me in the temple, but they went back to Solomon. What do we do? He's in the temple. He won't let go, kind of thing, and kill him. So he was struck down right there at the horns of the altar. And how about who was the son of David's that raped David's daughter? No, Absalom's a part of that story. Yeah, exactly.
Killed.
Who did he kill? Who did Absalom kill? Amnon is his name. So Amnon raped who? Who was his sister? Yeah, Tamar. Yep, she shows up. There's two Tamars. So that can get kind
That's
of.
why I don't say, because I'm like the Genesis. You know what I mean? And then Tamar also.
Yeah, yep.
And that was also like a weird.
Judah.
Thing. It's like always.
Judah saw what he thought was a cult prostitute along the way.
Yeah.
And so he doesn't have any money, so he gives a lamb and his signet ring and his staff to her as a down payment. And turns out that it's Tamar, his daughter-in-law, and that he refused to give his other sons to after her husband died. So he's ready to kill Tamar when she shows up pregnant. He's going to stone her to death, and she says, "Whoa, well, before you do that, whose are these things?" And it's like, oh boy, they're mine. He really deserved to be stoned to death himself, but so he, of course, changed course at that point. Yep, Amnon rapes Tamar. Absalom says to Tamar, "Sister, just be quiet. Don't do anything about this. Relax." But of course, Absalom's seething inside, and he invites all his brothers to a big party. And at that party, that's where he kills Amnon. And then he gets banished from the kingdom for lots of years until He works with Joab to try to convince David to permit him to get closer, to come into Jerusalem, but not the palace. And slowly he works his way back into the kingdom. And of course, he was at the city gates with the chariot and, meeting and greeting people and working the people over, winning their favor, telling them, hey, if I were the king, here's how I would decide in your case. All these people come to the courthouse to get the king to make judgments. And so he's winning the hearts of the people, kind of underneath David's nose. He doesn't see the coup coming. Then he throws the big coup. Who was the commander of Absalom's army when he had formed the army? No, Joab's David's.
I thought he went
No, Joab went with Adonijah when Adonijah attempted to become the king at the end of David's life. This is in the middle of David's life. So he gets Amasa as the commander of Absalom's army. And Amasa was, I believe, David's nephew. And so he, after the coup was put down and Absalom's dead, David makes Amasa the commander of his army, apparently in place of Joab, or maybe they're both leading somehow, and then Joab doesn't like that. Remember, he kills Amasa.
So it was Absalom that killed Amnon?
Yep. Yeah. And I think this is an interesting character. We don't know a lot about him, but remember who it was that convinced Amnon of how he could get Tamar in close quarters and take advantage of her? Because Amnon was just burning with lust and sick to his stomach. He wanted his sister so bad sexually. And so it's Jonadab, this crafty fellow who gives him the idea. And it's maybe just helpful. There's so many warnings in Proverbs about not throwing our lot in with sinners. If sinners entice you and say, come, let us ambush this man and we'll split the plunder, among ourselves. Do not go in with them. And here's a real example. Don't go in with a guy named Jonadab. Bad company corrupts good character. Don't even be close friends with a guy like this. And so often, of course, we know it's the people that we put ourselves around that pull us towards righteousness or pull us towards unrighteousness. We read in Mark of Jesus hanging out with sinners and tax collectors, and we're going to have to be among sinners as believers and as pastors, but that doesn't mean that we form close friendships with these people to the point where they become our confidants, where we're spending most of our time with them. So there's always kind of a tension in there of spend time, yes, this gets into Proverbs, but we spend time with sinners, we befriend them and share the gospel with them, but we don't yoke ourselves to them and make them the people that we're hanging out with every weekend. If you're hanging out with unbelievers every weekend, the same unbelievers, eventually you're going to start talking like them and acting like them. We all know that probably from high school days.
Even the hard thing about work and stuff, being around people all day, it's like soaked in the world,
Yeah, for sure. No easy answers about that.
I've even noticed something that I struggle with is just even TV and movies, because I'll watch a show and we're influenced by people whether we like it or not,
Oh yeah.
And there's people you'll like the way that this guy is, you know what I mean? Like his person or whatever, his personality and stuff. And then you'll realize, I've caught myself kind of being discipled, you know what I mean? And it's
for sure.
Your personality traits and stuff.
Yeah.
True though. I mean,
I think this could get me on a hobby horse. We all know the dangers of media, but I think Christians are really, really naive about how media influences us, how TV and music influences us. And I feel like the average mainstream Christian is not watching stuff that's much different than the world. Even for me, we've maybe talked about this before, maybe Trent and I, but a TV show, I don't know if anyone watches this anymore, but The Office or Parks and Rec, and I watch one episode of Parks and Rec, I'm like, well, that is really funny, but there's some crass stuff here that I can't watch, I watched a few episodes of The Office, found it online. Like, everyone talks about this. And, watched a few episodes and like, man, that I really enjoy that. It's funny, but I knew this would not take me in a good place. How can I laugh at things that are sinful and, utterly against the things of God? But, if we laugh at that stuff long enough, that's totally changing our character and our personality. So I know it's a bummer, but I think we've got to say no to like 99.9999% of movies. And there's probably some out there that we can watch and enjoy, and there's, some redemptive movies out there, but it's a bummer to not watch any movies. But then I think about, first and second and third century Christians, there's a lot of things they couldn't do either. If you wanted to work in a hospital or a university, you had to offer incense to the gods or, swear allegiance to Caesar. And so all of a sudden Christians are totally eliminated from the intellectual world and from the medical field. And that's a bummer. But, sometimes we have to do things as Christians that are hard. And this is going on preaching now. And it's not 100% related, but and for me, it's easy to judge some people. And I've got my own stuff, Twitter, that's my source of social media or Facebook, or, but, if everyone you follow on Twitter is really worldly and, saying funny things or crass things or whatever, that's going to affect us too. And so we have our different areas where we maybe are liable to stumble. So we want to look out for the Jonadabs in our life. And, it's bleeding into Proverbs, which we haven't talked about yet, but, the message that bad company corrupts good character, and don't throw in your lot with sinners, and that sort of thing.
I don't want to keep going. I was going to say, just for me too, like, because it's like the struggle is real, It's like we can do the opposite and read biographies and stuff. That's a good example.
There's a small, I will say this though too, I don't even want to say it's pushback against what you said, because I 100% agree with everything you said. But there is the idea though that, we can't be so removed from the culture that we're just not even part of it either. And I mean, that's the same thing with friendships, but it's also the same thing with, I'm not saying, for example, I listen to only Christian rap and I got all bad rap out of my life. But if I can't live, for example, if I'm hanging around people that listen to that all day and I can't even listen to it a little bit to where I can have discussions about music or things like that, there's certain things that can, if you're doing it for the right purpose and the right intent, I'm going to listen to this music once a week to see how it sounds so that I can build conversations for the gospel versus I'm just going to listen because I love listening to music that people hate, So I think it's really hard to know where that balance is. But I do think we don't want to remove ourselves so much from the culture that we can't talk about anything going on in the world or in shows or whatever, because we cut ourselves off from every source of media or movies, but on the other end, we can't watch things and just blatantly love and laugh at things that God hates. And I think of coming from St. Louis, I think it was a big struggle where people would just love listening to rap music that God hates, and it didn't matter to them because it was just part of the culture they were in. But it affects them more than they realize. And I think we might have a different struggle, and maybe ours is TV and stuff too. Sure. But on the other end, I think there's a small balance of okay, how do we at least stay enough in the culture to at least understand it a little bit, but obviously not going to the point, because it will influence us heavily. So there's a few small, it's not even pushback, it's just
sure.
Something else to consider is that's the war too, that even Christians are fighting, how far in the world do we go to be in the world but they're not of it type of thing. And that's always the hardest battle to fight, to understand, I think.
And sometimes I think about the idea of being a pastor. I mean, it's wise encouragement to not be of the world. You have to be in the world and stuff. But as a pastor, being above reproach and stuff. So it's even more so. The other day, I was in a restaurant, actually in Colorado, and there's this movie playing on the screen in this TV. And there, I was like, "Oh, that's a funny movie." I don't even remember. It was Hitch or whatever. And I remember there's a couple people that hadn't seen it. Was like, "Oh, you got to watch the movie." And then just a couple nights ago, I watched it, and I watched about half of it. I just had the urge to text them, "Don't watch it," because I just realized I don't want to be affiliated with this movie. So the idea of
the more you get sanctified, you look back at things you used to watch. Whoa, I didn't even know this was.
It's hard though too, because some movies, it's like, even like, to me, I can watch certain stories or like stories of things, and to me, it's a story. So like, I don't think God likes cussing, but if someone cusses 50 times, it's like they're telling the story of a character who is extremely sinful. And I can watch that through a redemptive lens to not root for that person and say, wow, that person is really bad. But on the other end, like when the movie, through the music and all this stuff, is tempting you to root for those type of people, like it's really hard. But on the other end, depending on the movie or what it's about, like sometimes like I could just look at there's a movie like a romantic story where they're full of sin and lust, and I don't watch anything with nudity at all, but like you get to the end and like they teach people, oh, it's okay to just have sex outside of marriage and do this and just flirt around and date 5 people at once. But I get to the end and I'm like, wow, they have terribly empty lives, and like I can actually get sometimes, a redemptive story out of something that was garbage, because I can say, this is what the world thinks is like beautiful, but it's really empty. So like, depending on how we consume media and how we filter it, I'm trying to be careful not to promote people to like go watch a bunch of stuff they shouldn't watch and say, oh, you'll just learn things from it. No, it will.
Yeah, I think as believers, we probably need to push towards holiness more than being in the world. And I bet in 10 years, I bet there'll be things you're watching now that you're going to be ashamed of watching. So
1,000%.
I would, if my word would be to push yourself in the other direction.
I 1,000%.
Cool. No, but you're right that it's a challenge to know, how you're in the world and not of the world. I don't think, it's probably good to know some headline news or what's going on. But personally, I don't think I need to know the latest and greatest rap song to be able to communicate to a guy. I can go to the gym, and best way to communicate, hey, what's your name? What do you do? What do you like to do for fun? And you've got a friendship and a relationship building without having to have common music or.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, we can ask them about what they watch or what kind of music without having to actually experience it.
Yeah, like becoming like the world to, well, I'm just going to dabble in sin, basically, or it's the same thing in preaching. Like, it's not, I'm just going to do this to get people in the door and then give them the gospel. It's like terrible. Like, it doesn't work. Then you're compromising all these other things and showing that they're not valuable to try to trick people into giving them the gospel. Like, it's just not. Same thing with, I think, our worldliness too. So I like 100% agree. So like, I'm just saying there's a lot of factors in those things.
Yeah, for sure. And we're going to, of course, sort through things differently. Yeah.
Realistically, who's watching their movies, like 1/10% are like intentionally watching something to, so that they could be a better witness or something. I mean, we watch something because we want to entertain by it. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like realistically.
Equip did this thing a couple years ago where it was a movie and theology night, where they watch a movie and then they just discuss like redemptive qualities about it. but it kind of died out because they weren't watching movies that people wanted to watch, just because you couldn't watch a lot of movies that people were really interested in. It always had to be really simple Disney or 12 Angry Men.
George, you move on tonight.
There's a lot of bad stuff in the I actually think it's really funny.
Yeah.
It's just total feminism.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right, let's take a 3-minute break, not too long. One thing I wanted to do for review is to get into the Kings a little bit. We'll just rifle through some stuff. There's always way more than to do than we're able to, but I want to keep us a little bit refreshed. So we'll keep it a short break and we'll come back.
Do you have like a comprehensive, so like for myself, if I'm like trying to study and stuff, and sometimes I go through random notes of like, we're trying to just piece it all together. I'm taking notes as we go. Is there some comprehensive thing that I can look at that, oh, okay, so I could study, especially to know what order I need to study things in, because sometimes I'm studying random pieces of information.
Yeah, this test would give you a lot of stuff, not everything.
I probably have. Sometimes I want a little more details than he would put on that.
Sure. Yeah, I could work on that perhaps the next.
I mean, I think this is really helpful. This would be pretty cool. From what I've heard is, what I saw on the flashcard, the class isn't that different to where.
Nah, not really.
Just so you guys know, I'm getting first pick at that shofar.
Oh, yeah?
So.
That's pretty sweet.
If you can actually make it blow, then.
Hey, Jim, are you there?
Yeah.
You're not taking a 3-minute break, huh?
Well, when I first got here, they were just taking a break, so I'm good.
So this Sunday, you want to, I don't know, I've done a lot of pulpit supply, and sometimes like they're like, oh, we'd love to take you out to lunch, especially if they don't know you.
Yep.
So I don't know if that's probably going to happen or not, and maybe you know better than I do. But as long as that doesn't happen, I'm more than open to do it like this Sunday. I mean,
okay. I got to think about this Sunday now. Yeah, as far as I know, I'm good. I don't know what they'll want to do. When I was there those 3 weeks, it was all kinds of different crazy stuff that they had going on. So, like they had the first Sunday I was there was 70 some people there. The second Sunday I was there was 33. So, yeah.
a little bit of variance there.
Yeah, and Dennis is actually from Volga, so I don't know if he sticks around or what he does.
Is that his normal church?
Yeah, I guess he lived here in DeSmet and then moved to Volga because he's an SDSU professor. So he moved to Volga to be closer to Brookings.
Yeah. Makes sense. I have no idea where Volga is, or I know where Brookings is, like an hour north. I don't even know where DeSmet is, really.
Well, Volga is like 5 minutes straight west of Brookings. And it'll kind of depend on what way. Well, you're in Hartford, right?
Yeah.
So you want to just go to Salem and then go from Salem straight north until you can't go anymore. Then go to Howard and straight up.
Makes sense.
How far away are you from Sioux Falls?
But by the time I've got my outline,
To get to where the two interstates connect is exactly 90 miles. But anywhere you want to go in Sioux Falls is going to be
outlining it is like a huge part of my actual
Man.
prep. Like I'm thinking
Be a
through.
little bit of a drive.
You know what I mean? How
Yeah, when
How you doing with
when
it?
I
I'm
went to
making
the
sure
heart
I know
hospital,
how
it
to
was
stay
almost
every day.
exactly 100
you know what
miles.
I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a big
I mean,
deal.
like a lot of
I don't
it
mind a little extra
comes
driving.
on the spot, but you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? I know
Well,
where
I
I'm
imagine
going,
they
what I'm
pay you
doing.
miles, don't they?
Yeah,
Like I feel,
I haven't talked to them or
I
anything
don't know,
about
I
it.
feel
But,
closure.
they said they
Just
pay
to wait, I'm not
miles.
gonna pass around.
They didn't say
No blowing
anything
it
else as
tonight,
far
because
as
it's gotta be,
other
you know, we gotta wait, but.
I
It
didn't.
sounds like they're going,
From Israel.
they're going with a lot of TPA guys. So you and Corey Kitch
That's pretty
and
cool. Sometimes
Jason's
these got like
coming
something
later.
really big. That's actually not a shofar. It's
Yep.
some other kind of.
So resource to that. So
You know,
Get
as
to
long as you keep coming to class and take the test, you'll get one.
yeah, the way the CMA makes them do it is kind of weird.
As long as you take it.
So they can't like they can't talk to a guy more than so many times, and they can't have more than two guys going at the same time. Like if they have two guys come to candidate, they have to before they can have a third guy come, they have to get rid of one of the two guys in their pool. So it's weird how they do it.
Well,
yeah, I read about them. They didn't seem too. They seem pretty solid overall. I mean,
Yeah, they're
always
pretty similar, I would say, to us. There's a few things that are a little
185.
So you're.
Yeah, well, your church was in the weird before you showed up. Really weird, right? So,
well, they were UCC, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so I would say they were in the category past really weird.
yeah,
I don't think
I've heard. Well, feel free to check.
You guys will get done usually about the time that I'm coming home.
I mean, like life goal.
Yeah.
I would
Like
love
I
to
ran into
get 3 plates.
to Luke,
Like life. You know what I'm saying?
That'd be cool.
Just as I
was
got
my life
home
goal.
Yeah.
I reduced
the
it to
other day.
25 because I'm like, I'm never gonna make it.
Cool.
I
Well,
never-
yeah.
yeah,
Let me
I
know.
never thought-
Even if it's like a
now,
email or text or whatever. I mean, I'll get it and I'll already be up there. So it is, you know, I could say, hey, you know, why don't we have Jim come or something? I mean, it'd be good to see you. So
Yeah, so you aren't really.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I really have no idea. I know that when I did pulpit
Push it
supply,
away from the table.
almost every
I've
church
been trying to run or walk or
asked me to
something.
lunch afterwards. There was maybe one or
On our
two.
scale, weaker.
yeah, same thing for me. I haven't done a lot of pulpit supply since I was like 18, but about the 5 or 6 churches, they normally had Sunday night services too. And they had me preach both services, and then they would have me stay the day, have lunch, and even if I didn't, they would always ask me for lunch. So,
Sure.
yeah, we'll see.
I haven't went.
We'll see. I'll keep you updated too.
Right on. Yeah, I never did a church that had 2 services. When I went to West Center in Madison, they had just gone back to 1 service. So.
Yeah, must be a new good thing.
I know.
It's a lot of SBC stuff. A lot of Southern Baptist churches, I think, were doing 2 services for a while.
Sure. Yeah, so the closest I've come to that was the last 3 weeks I did our service, and then I went over to the CMA right after that. So
That's big help for sure.
All right, I'm gonna turn you to the whiteboard, Jim. All right.
Yeah, I guess. I also looked 16 when I was in Judah.
Like me. I look like a haggardly 16.
Hey, you do well though because you're a little older than me though. So.
All right, what Northern Kings can you remember? The first one?
Jeroboam.
Nicely done, Jim.
When I go into
Cool. All right, why did Jeroboam become king, remember? Who was the first Southern king? Yeah! Rehoboam. And remember what, Solomon's sins, of course. All those women and the idolatry, and the kingdom was really shaky, even though it was prosperous. He kind of left it in shaky position. And then Rehoboam, remember what dumb thing he did? How he became king, and there was the young men told him, here's what you should do. You should make the taxes, increase the taxes, show people that you're tougher than your dad. And the old man said, no, you should make the taxes less and win the good favor of the people. And he sided. This is a lesson for us, sided with the young men, right? We should listen to people who are older than us. We're all young here. So he sides with the young men, and people rebelled. So, kind of on a human side, that's what's going on. But then, on the divine side, remember there was a prophet. Be surprised if anyone remembers his name. A prophet that came to Jeroboam, and remember that he actually ripped his robe. What? Yeah, nailed it. Well done, Ahijah, the prophet. And he prophesied to Ahijah that he would have 10 of the tribes, and Rehoboam would be left with 2 pieces, right? He ripped up his cloak. Kind of weird. I mean, how do you even sit there and rip it up? I don't know.
Do you think that's a legit text to preach like conservatism? Like, he kind of went with the liberals, raise taxes. Probably not. I know.
Oh, man. Can you see this, Jim, or do I need to get it more square?
I think it's all right.
Okay. Jeroboam, what did he do after this announcement? Where did he go? He fled. He knew, apparently it was public enough that he knew that his life would be in danger. Where did he flee to? Yeah, it goes to Egypt, which you remember that Joseph, Mary, they all went to Egypt. Egypt was a common place to go for refuge if you're a political refugee or whatever. And the Pharaoh, or he's called a king in the text, I think. The Pharaoh of Egypt came and he attacks Rehoboam and the southern kingdom. Anybody remember his name? This is 5 years into Rehoboam's rule. Not Necho. No, that's one of them. Necho's way down in, yeah, you're right, Pharaoh Necho. That's in the days of Josiah. He's going to kill Josiah. Josiah's like, what is he, 16, I think. So it's way later. And anybody remember the date of the Battle of Megiddo? Necho. Whoa! Well done. Nailed it. That's pretty sweet. 609, you got it. So it was Shishak. Shishak comes, and remember gold shields that were in the armory, and they're replaced with bronze. And so, think about all of Solomon's glory, Saul, David, Solomon, all of Solomon's glory, and it gets lost 5 years into his successor's reign. So, we just don't know what will come after us, what our churches will be like after we die, or, inheritance that we leave to somebody else. Who knows? It might all get squandered. So, the kingdom is divided, of course, into 2. Anybody? Yeah. Jeroboam. Who comes next? Jeroboam. Yep. Nadab. Nadab. I always say Nadab, but Nadab might be even more right. And then who comes next? Jeroboam, Nadab. Baasha. Nice job, Jim. Baasha. Now Nadab is Jeroboam's son. And so what do you think Baasha did to Nadab? Killed him, yep. It's always the way it goes in the northern kingdom. So Jeroboam, Nadab, Baasha. Who comes next?
Elah,
yep. Elah is Baasha's son, and so you can imagine what the next guy did to Elah, right? Jeroboam, Nadab, Baasha, Elah. Zimri. Yeah, nice job, Jim. You're nailing them. Stole them from Trent. Zimri, Tibni, Omri, and remember, anybody know anything about this execution? How Zimri killed Elah? This is the one where Zimri was a general or a commander of Elah's, and he turned against Elah, assassinated him, became king for how many days? Yeah, 7 days, 1 week, and then you guys know how he died, right? I love to share this one. Yep, self-immolation, I think, is the official phrase for burning yourself to death. Burned the palace down, and because they turned against him because, so I guess he knew he was going to die. So Zimri, Tibni, and Omri. Remember anything about Tibni and Omri? Yeah. Yep. So they had a co-regency, or maybe not even co-regency. That's usually like when two guys are ruling together. Some people followed Tibni. Some people followed Omri. I think it took him 5 years to die. Eventually he dies somehow or another. Omri, this is going to be the start of the Omride dynasty. And Omri, we're told in the scripture, was the worse than any of the kings that preceded him. So he's a bad dude. But one thing that he did was established a new capital in Israel. Remember what that capital was? Samaria, and he bought the hill that Samaria was on from what guy? What was his name? It was Shimmer. And prior to this, Tirzah was the capital. And prior to that, it was Shechem. So the capital was kind of moving around a little bit before it kind of became established as Samaria. All right, let's see. Now I got to start thinking, who's Omri's son? Yep. Well, yeah, that one's easy. I didn't really need to think. It's the next two that Ahab. How about after Ahab?
Ahaziah.
Yeah. And then after that?
5 J's.
Oh, yeah, nice. Yeah, Joram, also known as Jehoram. That's where it starts to get really confusing. So there's 4 guys in the Omride dynasty. That always helps me to remember a little bit. And Ahab, of course, we remember that he was a really bad dude. Who did he marry? Jezebel, yeah. And daughter of what is it? Baal of Sidon. And of course we know Ahab, the text really slows down during his rulership, and we get all that stuff about Elijah, and then we get all that stuff about Elisha, and it'd be fun to talk more about their deeds. We probably don't have time now, but how did remember who was, and I don't know exactly where he would be. I could look. Who was Ahab's contemporary on the southern kingdom side? Let's see where we would place him. You guys remember who was the king of the southern kingdom during?
It wasn't Asa, was it?
Nope. And well, it's actually right before this guy. Oh wow, yeah. They go pretty fast. So it's number 4 actually. I wouldn't think they would be contemporaries. Oh, yeah. It's Jehoshaphat. And Jehoshaphat was a good king, but what we get in the text over and over again is that he allied himself with the northern kingdom. The text says that he made peace with Israel. And that wasn't really what God wanted, because we mentioned before, and we'll show up again in Isaiah. But, it was always a bad thing to make alliances, right? That God always wanted his people to trust in him. And so Jehoshaphat and Ahab, remember what Syrian city that they tried to capture? They went into battle together. This is how Ahab died. There's a few battles with this city. It's Ramoth Gilead. Remember how Ahab died in this battle? Yeah, random archer. Yeah, of course, we know it's not random in God's eyes or whatever, but and it was. Remember that they talked about going into battle together, but then they said, well, let's consult the prophets, and 400 or 450 or something like that prophets say, yeah, go into battle, you'll be successful. One guy even, I think his name was Zechariah, maybe. He makes some iron horns, and he's like, oh, this is how you're going to beat the Syrians. The prophetic gestures were such a thing. Then Jehoshaphat says, well, isn't there any other prophet we can consult? Why 450 wasn't enough for him? I don't really know. But Ahab says, well, there is this one guy. Remember his name? Yeah, Micaiah. There's this one guy, but he never says anything good. I don't want to talk to him. And Micaiah lies to him, probably under his breath or sarcastically or something, and says, oh, yeah, go ahead. You'll win. Great. Says, didn't I tell you to always tell me the truth? You're always lying to me. And then Micaiah says, well, I saw, I can't quote it now, but, I saw that you'll die in battle. And they still go into battle, and sure enough, Ahab gets killed in battle. Ahab went incognito. That was the really divine part. And he convinced Jehoshaphat. I don't know how he did this, but Jehoshaphat to wear his kingly robes, and they're chasing Jehoshaphat, and he says, leave me alone. And they could see, oh, it's not Ahab, and they left him alone, and Ahab ends up dying. So the other, let's see, gotta get the order here. I'll fill in some of these for us. But this is Jehoram. Joram, this is what gets so confusing, is that these guys have similar names, or the same names. So, these are all contemporaries, and then Ahaziah, is right there. Joram is right there. So, it's like, which one are you talking about? But I'll come back to that in a second. Who wiped out the Amrite dynasty? Who's the Amrite dynasty? Remember who assassinated? Ahab's son Ahaziah becomes king, and then his grandson Jehoram. Yeah, it's Jehu, driving like Jehu. Remember, he drove furiously. That's how they knew it was him that was coming. So, let's see. Then this is Athaliah. So, Athaliah is, let's see. Now I got to think about this. Athaliah was Ahab and Jezebel's daughter. And so the two lines kind of get crossed a little bit. And Ahaziah, now let's see, Joram was shot with an arrow, right? One of these guys, now I'm forgetting, one of these guys was shot with an arrow and was convalescing, healing up, and the other one was visiting him. So they're friends now. The north and south, the kings are friends. And then Jehu goes and he kills must have been this one. Joram. Oh man, now I'm a little confused. Yeah, they didn't have it must have been. I'm a little confused now. I need some more time to sort it out. But he kills two of them at the same time. Wipes out the Amrite dynasty. He kills 70 sons of Ahab. Remember he kills Jezebel, has them push her out the window. Kills all the priests of Baal. Remember that he says to them, we're going to have a big party for Baal. We're going to worship him. And he locks them all in a building, and then he burns them up. And this is all, at one point, there's a mention of the Lord, I forget where now, but talking about bringing justice because of the blood of Jehu. But, it seems like at this point, Jehu's fulfilling the Lord's will of wiping out these bad guys and wiping out Baal worship and the worship of Asherah. But Jehu wasn't a great guy himself. And then there's 5 folks in the Jehu dynasty. Who comes next? You guys remember? Make sure we get it right. Yeah. Ahaz.
Jehu wasn't a good guy.
Well, there weren't any good kings of the northern kingdom, but God did use them in this moment. But then 13, Jehoash, yep. 14,
Jeroboam.
Yeah, Jeroboam too.
Sequel.
Yeah. But then, so this guy ruled for a long time, and Israel was really prosperous under his rule. Remember which prophets were functioning during his rule? You guys remember? Not Micah. Micah was Isaiah, contemporary with Isaiah. This is not Jeremiah. Jeremiah's yeah. Jonah, yep. Amos and Hosea. Let me just double check on Hosea. I don't want to tell you I'm wrong. Yeah, Hosea. So I guess the key thing here is, especially helps you understand like Amos. You know, there's all that talk of wealth and the cows of Bashan, you know, referring to the women and people playing their guitar on their bed, like David, and it talks about their winter homes and talking about the poor being sold for a pair of sandals. So it kind of helps you to understand him railing against the oppression of the poor and their trust and enjoyment of wealth and riches, of knowing that, you know, this was a really prosperous time in the life of Israel. Then 15, remember who it was? Yep, Zechariah. He's the one that's going to get killed. Zechariah. So who comes next? Shalom? Menahem? Anyone know the two P's?
Pekahiah, Pekah.
Yeah, nice job, Jim. Jim, do you have them all down?
No, I have some holes in them. I haven't quite got them all yet. Like I lose the 5 J's, but I know the last one is Hosea.
You should get them all down by next week, and then we'll let you rattle them off really fast for us.
All right, I'll try, but I never miss an opportunity to embarrass myself. So.
Oh man, yikes! You and me both.
Is 17 minutes?
Yeah, it's an end. Got the worst handwriting in the world. And we'll maybe stop there. It'd be fun to get into the Southern Kings, but.
Do you think it's? I just think it seems like God's mercy. You know, I mean, like I've read the Old Testament, all this stuff, decent amount of times, the kings and all this stuff. It always kind of seemed, you know, like Southern Kingdom is better, like more righteous and stuff. I think it was God's mercy to allow them to be separated. You know what I mean? Just, I mean, I guess on one hand, it seems like, you know what I mean? Just like more judgment to come on the north.
Sure.
Jeroboam had Baasha and Zimri to operate Ahab, Ahaziah, Joram, Jehu, Jehoahaz, Joash, Jeroboam second, Zechariah, Shalom, Menahem, Pekahiah, and Pekah. What?
And the last one.
Hosea.
Yeah. Are you sure you want Pinky? Promise? No, I'm just kidding. No, that's a great job. Yeah, it's Menahem.
Oh.
Jack, no, you had it right. I had it wrong. Yep, it's a name.
Oh, it is a name.
Yep, I got that wrong. Oh yeah, and I have these. You can pass those around. This was on Wikipedia. I thought it was pretty helpful. A little chart because it gets really confusing. You know, the whole Ahaziah and Joram and these relationships. So it's kind of neat. You might have to look at it a while to interpret, but especially like the last four gets confusing because Jehoahaz, and you know Jehoiakim is his brother, and then Jehoiakim is his son, and then Zedekiah is, you know, uncle of Jehoiakim. I don't know. I thought it was pretty neat. Might help you out. Let's. All All right, let's do our essays so we don't run out of time. Okay, everyone's printed off. Trent did not get one done. Jackson's, I thought I printed yours off, Jackson. I read it. It was really good. Oh, you, sure. Well, how about, who wants to just summarize their take on this question, and then we'll have people pepper you with questions, push back and stuff like that. Ross isn't here. Jesus. You did it last time, didn't you, Zach?
I don't remember.
Talked about theirs last time.
I normally talk all the time.
All right, Jackson, present to us. Can you do it, or do you need? You don't have your notes in front of you. That'll be hard. You do have it up?
Yeah, I have it.
All right. Yeah. Don't read it, but put it in fresh words and tell us. The question is Isaiah 7:14. I guess I could read it. Get us really in the frame of mind. I can find Isaiah 2, the people, Jeremiah 2, the Lamentations.
I have it right here if you want.
Yeah, you want to read it?
Yeah, it says, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgins shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel.
Thanks, Jim. So the question is, I've heard about it all my life. I can't understand how Jesus was supposed to be a sign for King Ahaz. Is that passage about someone other than Jesus? Helping us to think through a little bit about this passage and the way prophecy works. And I think, one big thing for me, in proposing this is that, you're probably going to preach on this every year for the rest of your life. Once you become a full-time pastor anyway, because, how do you not include this in an Advent sermon? And so it's nice for you guys to have a pretty in-depth understanding of it. And, I think the more depth you can have to it, the less people are going to get bored with your sermon when they hear it every single year. And so, Jackson.
Yeah, so the whole, so I start like the virgin question, part of it.
Yeah, however you want to tackle it. Explain 7:14 to somebody who's struggling to understand it, and they don't really know how it works, because it's the Lord talking through Isaiah to Ahaz, and here's your sign. There's a virgin that will conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel. So this person's like, okay, well, fine, it's Jesus, but how does that help Ahaz? Kind of. So.
So it's fulfilled in Isaiah's day with Emmanuel, his son.
Yeah. Yep. Well, that would be, it kind of depends on your interpretation. Some people would say no, but that would be my interpretation,
Fulfilled immediate, near future with the boy, Emmanuel. And ultimately.
Hey, Jackson, it's really tough to hear you.
Oh, yeah, sorry, okay.
There you go. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. So fulfilled by Emmanuel in Isaiah's day, as a promise of, by the time he's old enough to know right from wrong, then the 2 kings' lands would be deserted. So that part of it was the sign, directly to Ahaz. It's a kind of a, comforting to him. But then ultimately, it'd be fulfilled with Jesus Christ, obviously. But just in the just that it's fulfilled by 2 different people, fully fulfilled in Jesus and partially by Emmanuel in Isaiah's day. And so a lot of prophecies work is by God using a sign in the prophet's day to ultimately, like, that will be ultimately fulfilled in the future. And not wording this correctly.
No, you're doing great.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that's really good. How about remember the Hebrew and the Greek and Latin?
So the Hebrew word used is alma, which refers to a young woman. Can imply her as a virgin, but doesn't necessarily mean a virgin. The technical Hebrew word for virgin is betula, and that one is not used in Isaiah 7:14. But the Septuagint goes with the translation. I forget the word, but it means technical, and it means a technical virgin. It's a translation of the Hebrew word alma, and Matthew quotes from the Septuagint, uses the word for a technical virgin.
Parthenos.
So, God using the ambiguity of alma to be fulfilled by Emmanuel's mother, not being a technical virgin in Isaiah's day, but also being fulfilled in Mary as actually being a virgin, the birth of Jesus. So.
Pretty cool to see how God would use nuances of a language, to communicate really incredible truth. Yeah.
Nobody could have thought that up.
Yeah, right. So you'd say to this college student, yeah, it was the word Ahaz, and there was a son that was born to a woman, a young woman in his own day, but the greater fulfillment is in Jesus. I would guess, like in our churches, probably scarcely anyone could say what you said with even in a really rudimentary way. There wouldn't be very many people that could. But I think it's such a rich thing that I think our people, it'd be nice if we could get them to the place where they could understand who Ahaz was. They're going to hear this, once a year. They might as well know who King Ahaz is and understand that there was an Emmanuel even in Ahaz's day. And Jesus, we know his name wasn't literally Emmanuel; it was Jesus. But his name's Emmanuel, and the meaning of Emmanuel, God with us. He is God with us par excellence. He is God himself. Yeah. So, and throughout Isaiah, the names would have lots of meaning. They were portents, I think, symbolic importance.
Like the prophecy, like a little bit after that, like obviously could be fulfilled by the Emmanuel in Isaiah's day, but I think because that refers to him.
Say that again.
Isn't there like a prophecy, like a chapter later or something?
Oh, the wonderful counselor,
yeah,
mighty God. Is that the one? Yeah. I'm sure there is. I'm just not quite sure which.
It's like not even. It's just a pretty small.
Which one you're talking about?
Chapter 8, verses 9 through 10. I suppose that's kind of. Never mind. That's No, that's not what it is. Never mind. That's a different. That is like. The wonderful counselor. Sure, that's obviously.
Well, how would you guys push back against Jackson Or what kind of follow-up questions would you have for him? Maybe, this one's maybe more kind of dry. Maybe there's not as much to push back on. If you guys have anything, you can put them on the spot for a second. Or anything you guys would add that maybe could be said. All right, cool. We'll jump into Isaiah. I've got this handout for us. Jim, did you get this attachment?
Yeah.
Awesome. And we'll just walk through Isaiah, but we don't, we can talk too without having to go through here. If you guys have stuff you want to talk about, we don't have to get to all of this either. If there's other stuff you're itching to bring up or ask about. What were your guys's, I know you got 20 chapters in, you didn't have as much time to read Isaiah. Did you guys read, Jason and Zach, did you read Isaiah or
No,
the textbook? Did you get the textbook read?
The textbook.
I got the textbook.
That takes you pretty far. Jim, what did you get done with the text and the textbook?
I got the textbook read this week. In my normal reading, I read Isaiah a month ago, so I'm hoping that that comes back to me. We'll see.
Well, what were your guys' takeaway from the textbook, from the text itself? Questions you had, things you maybe didn't notice before, or things you think are really important that should be said?
It's always been difficult to me when I'm reading like Old Testament, maybe probably compared to some people, maybe because it was always pretty foreign to me. And Isaiah is always really mushy, and if you don't understand the context behind it, it's extremely like, okay, there's this random king doing something. I don't even know what he's doing. I don't know who they're fighting and why. I mean, to be honest, that's sort of a lot of the Old Testament and has been for me. And then I just sort of get some spiritual principles out of what I'm reading, or like try to get some good understanding. But I never remember names and places and things when I'm going back through. And I think because of that, and maybe it's just like a scholarly struggle or like a really bad memory or something. But I think but it has hurt my understanding because when it comes to Isaiah, because of those struggles in general Old Testament stuff, I think as I'm reading too, I don't understand any of the context, and even reading an introduction to the book doesn't fathom. So like, I think going deeper and like looking a little more, with like King Ahaz and stuff, and the warnings that Isaiah was trying to give him, and just understanding a little bit. I mean, obviously I knew there was a northern kingdom and southern kingdom struggle, and seeing how Syria play into that and all that. And, it was helpful context as so I just think it is vital, and I think it was good just to read. Yeah, so I think that helped me personally was reading through, the conflict with Jehu, not Jehu, why am I thinking Jehu? Ahaz. Yeah. And just at least the beginning parts, at least get a good glimpse of the beginning of Isaiah and what was going on with, ultimately with, the Syro-Ephraimite war. So, yeah, I think that helped a little because, like I said, I cannot state how enough I struggle. Like, I read a whole story and then I might be able to tell you generally what happened, but I don't know any of the names. And you know how people, when they read names, like they put Bob in instead of so-and-so, like I'm not saying I do that, but I just ignore it almost, So I think it was helpful. It's been helpful to really study deep in that, and it will help in some ways. So.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that's where most people are at. Like you say, it's just mush. And really, I don't remember now when it was that I discovered there was an exile, but it was probably college. I don't know, maybe late high school. I don't know. And, I grew up in church. And I had read the Bible a lot. I had read Isaiah a lot because, I'd read through the Bible, quite a few times in high school. And like part of my passion for teaching Old Testament is because I wonder, why did I not know that? Why did nobody teach me that? And how in the world can you ever, you can get a spiritual truth. Anyone can read Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and, understand some of the minor prophets, discover a little bit about God. But you really have no clue what's going on if you don't at least know that there were two kingdoms, that Assyria destroyed the northern kingdom, Babylon destroyed the southern kingdom. God sent his people into exile for 70 years. The Persians defeated the Babylonians and released the people to come back to Israel. That's a simple truth. You could write that down. That's one paragraph. And anyone can take about 5 minutes and could memorize what I just said. And yet Christians go their whole lifetimes and never know those truths. And I think, it's the key, knowing just a paragraph's worth of historical information is the key to unlocking so much of the Old Testament. And so I think what you just expressed is what so many believers experience. And my wife can attest to the fact that I'm not great at memorizing things, songs. I'm atrocious at memorizing. My kids, they know hymns better than I do. I've been singing them my whole life. They can sing worship songs like it's nobody's business. They know all the lyrics. I hear them over and over again, and I still struggle to kind of get them down. But I've worked really hard because teaching middle schoolers Old Testament, almost 20 years ago now. Not quite. I just sort of fell in love with trying to teach it to them and seeing how much people can learn and me discovering how much I could learn even though I struggle with it. So I get the struggle. And I think anyone can do it with enough time and effort. And it's fun when you start getting a few pegs, that you can start hanging things on. Then, it's kind of like you get a few puzzle pieces in place, and all of a sudden, oh man, I'm finding all kinds of pieces here and putting them together. So even if now it's frustrating, don't give up because it starts to snowball a little bit where you start to connect more dots and get some mental pegs to hang things on. It gets better and better.
It's helpful because there's a lot of, over time you're memorizing like, okay, I don't have the pegs to put this on, which is sometimes how I feel,
right?
Because I don't have the comprehension of those things that, because I was like most New Testament Christians that like go hardcore in the New Testament and like, then I read stuff like 1st and 2nd Samuel and read an awesome story, but I'm like, whoa, that's awesome, and I'll think of a way to apply it. Don't remember the names or what happened fully later, but then I think it's helpful though to all this is really helpful. It's just the idea of okay, let me memorize all these random things, but eventually I think you start to get the pegs and put them into place.
Yeah, for sure.
Memorizing 20 Kings of Peace won't do a lot until you try to purposely redo their stories over and over again a few times and really piece together who they were and why they were there. And that's sort of where I've been a little bit on. So but going through Isaiah a little bit was helpful to just try to get at least a decent picture because when I was memorizing the dates, the Sire my war was there.
Yeah.
And to me, I can't remember a date unless I know what the heck it was in the first place.
Yeah, right, right.
Yeah, there's a lot of good research, I think, that was helpful.
And, I was telling Trent, I think the number one best way to learn this stuff is to teach it. If you can find a couple of middle school students and meet with them every week and try and teach them this stuff or, teach it in a Sunday school or something, I think that'll help you a lot too. Most of the stuff that we learn because we teach. And so if you don't do anything with it, you forget it pretty quickly. But if you teach it to somebody else, then it sticks.
How do you, what's a good recommendation for doing that? But just because in a classroom setting, it's hard to let's read 1 Samuel today, or you're just reading one chapter and 2 chapters.
I haven't done it a ton with adults because I guess somehow I end up teaching younger kids usually. I think what I would typically do would be, even, I guess I'd lead the men's Bible study, I'd do, but, just to do some review each time. That's what I do when I'm preaching through the Old Testament. I'll frequently review, even with the congregation, take 10 minutes and walk them through the big storyline of the Bible, of the Old Testament. So, today we're talking about Solomon. Well, how did we even get here? Because we're dealing with Solomon's sins and all of that. And we just walk you through the Bible, Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and the tower, the flood and the Tower of Babel and the patriarchs and the period of Judges, or the conquest and the period of Judges and, Samuel and Saul and David and Solomon, and they ruled a united kingdom. And after Solomon, the kingdom was split with Jeroboam and Rehoboam, and the northern kingdom, all the kings were evil, and they were destroyed in 722 by the Assyrians. But there's always somebody bigger that comes along. And the Babylonians, they destroyed the Assyrians, and eventually they destroyed the southern kingdom in 586 BC. And let's see where Solomon fits into this. That's who we're going to be talking about today. And, I think you can just kind of work it into your teaching. Maybe it is 10 minutes. And, probably about 5 years ago when I was preaching through some Old Testament books, I did it even more than I do now. But, there were people that really loved that, say that they learned so much through that. Or, the same thing if you're teaching a Sunday school class, you can take some time and, you're teaching through 1 Samuel. Well, let's just get our minds around, where we're at. Let me just walk us through some of the big stuff in 1 Samuel. Let's remember that, Eli and Hannah and Elkanah and Peninnah and, Hophni and Phinehas, and, the ark was lost, and the commanders there. You can walk people through a lot of that stuff.
So you'd say a good idea might be to review for 5 or 10 minutes, and maybe bounce around in chapters a little bit to where you get some bigger events. Depending on what you're doing, I guess if you're going a whole Old Testament, you might bounce around in specific events. If it's one book, depending on how short it is, maybe you do, 2 chapters here, 3 here, 2 here, or something.
Yeah, you could do that. Like we're going in the men's, and I don't do a ton of reviews. Sometimes I'll summarize, where we've come from. But, 1 Samuel, we take a chapter a week. But you can still, review where you've come from, or even look forward to future things. And then you read that chapter and you discuss it a little bit, and you pray, and you're done. But trying to get the big picture stuff in. And I think, depending on how long your Bible study is, maybe the group masters the really big highlighted stuff, and then you can take it a level deeper, and you can hit up some stuff that they maybe don't know yet and try and help them to master that. But, I know there's some people are allergic to facts and dates and details, and why do I need to learn that? I get that sometimes. But people say this review. Well, if you want to know anything about the Old Testament, you're going to have to do the hard work. You don't want to stay there because, you want to get into the spiritual meaning of some of the texts and the application points, but you kind of have to try and get your mind around some of it.
It's always been a struggle of mine, so that's why I'm encouraged by this class.
Yeah, that's cool. That's encouraging.
I appreciate it.
And you'll have to dig in. I mean, as pastors, we're going to have to know more than, more than most people in our congregation. There might be a few saints that know more than you, but if 80% of the people know more than us, we're not going to be able to take them very far. And so, we have to work hard to know more than our people know, so we can take them somewhere.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that stuff up. That's great. What else for you guys?
A lot of good stuff in the book.
Yeah.
Let's see here. I really like this defense of Isaiah writing the whole book. It's, just all the, when he gets into the New Testament citations and everything, I thought that was really good. I always like that. Says, let's see here.
Both sides of the book were cited equally somewhere.
Yeah.
Basically. What 1 through 39 and 40 through 66 were like the two sections, I guess, that people thought.
Yeah, Deutero Isaiah or Trito Isaiah. And he's going to still argue that it shouldn't be a shibboleth. Remember the term shibboleth? What they made the Gileadites made Ephraim. One of the folks, as they were crossing the ford of one of those rivers, the Arnon or the Jabbok or something like that, they made them say the word shibboleth, and if they couldn't say it, they got killed. Mm-hmm. So he said that we shouldn't make the authorship of Isaiah into a theological shibboleth or a test for orthodoxy. He provides a little bit of a defense for, look, you could conceivably view the school of Isaiah as having continued his work, or a redactor that wrote a section from and attached it to Isaiah, and a New Testament author could still refer to it as Isaiah, even though it's not technically Isaiah's words. I think it's kind of the gist of what he said.
Yeah, there was several things. I can't find it, but no. When they were quoting that, it was a woman actually.
I've got that marked on 306 towards the middle, Marigoleth or whatever. No, there was another thing too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it ends in the first paragraph of 307, but that whole themes and vocabulary from about the Holy One of Israel, Holy One of Israel. But
yeah, she argued from 15 different subject areas in the book, showing that both halves have common designations.
It is a really good argument. I was like, wow.
Oh, dependence on Isaiah, number 2, by other prophets on 307. And then New Testament citations cited by name 21 times, and references to both halves of the book, identifying both as Isaiah. So whoever the New Testament, that's pretty much like case closed almost.
Yeah, I think so.
For the most part. Yeah. They didn't say from that book or that multiple people wrote. I mean, that seemed pretty good case, but not orthodoxy. Not a huge thing.
What do you guys think of that YT Raddy or Raday, who is more modern in 1970, used computer technology and studied different linguistic stuff, even more, I don't know, whatever, in depth or stuff that was easier to gather data with computers. And what was his end result? Or first part of the book was similar enough that it was profitable to attribute both to Isaiah, and then 49 through 66. Yeah, I'll just read the sentence. Isaiah 49 through 57 and 58 through 66 had so many affinities together, and so many differences with the rest of the book that those most naturally required a third author. These were both confirmed and challenged traditional critical thinking about the book. And then they write this whole thing about how he was also subject to vigorous critique, but that's not a big deal.
Yeah, I just feel like I don't listen to computers from the 70s, man.
Yeah, I didn't even know what I was. That's what I can say, you in the 70s, man. Yeah, I'm really?
Yeah, and they're, kind of giving us the history of interpretation. I think it's it's but when you get into Paul's letters, there's always these talk of computer programs that analyze. Well, Paul couldn't have written this because it's so different from what he wrote over here. And I think, it's like, well, somebody writing, maybe it's 20 years later and you're writing a different book, you're writing it to different people, it's different subject matter. It's like, well, your vocabulary is going to change quite a lot, So linguistic analyses are never been real convincing to me. I'm sure the way I write now compared to how I wrote in middle school or high school would be substantially different.
I think there was a pretty good case, and I came away either convinced that Isaiah wrote it, or at very worst, that someone from his school just finished his work.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, I don't know, it just seems so modern to me. It's just like, can't you just believe the Bible? It's like he's a prophet, man. That's the whole point. You know what I mean? It's like he's a prophet. Like if we believe that, if you believe in all the miraculous, and all that stuff, then you don't have to struggle with all that. It's like, oh, he's inspired. It's like, look at what Peter says about prophets and everything else. It's like he's inspired.
All right. Well, any other big things you want to talk about from the textbook?
In the theological message, he talked about God as Savior and Redeemer. And just us talking about the kinsman redeemer sort of thing earlier in Ruth, that was a new idea. And then just tying that idea into what this is prophesying God or Christ to be. I don't know. I thought it was interesting. I don't know if I got my mind wrapped around it totally, but it seems like there's something significant there.
Yeah. Yeah, God's our Redeemer. We're human redeemers in the life of Israel, and God's our ultimate Redeemer. Would redeem Israel even out of Babylon bondage.
I got you. There's a bunch of stuff. I don't know. Made me want to revise it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
It's a success for sure. Well, let's tackle. If you find something, Jason, you can bring it up again. Let's tackle our worksheet here. We'll probably try and rifle through a lot of this stuff and slow down if there's something that we should really slow down on. Let's see here. The writing prophets is the first blank here, and just pre-classical versus classical. Sometimes scholars, I think it's probably Walton that use those phrases, but just pointing out that prior to the 8th century, it's 8th century BC is the next one. The prophets weren't writing prophets. Think about Elijah and Elisha. Those guys, and lots of other prophets that have been mentioned, prior to them, but they didn't write. They gave their oral messages. But the 8th century brought a new era where these prophets who were speaking, they're sharing all these oral messages. They began to write them down, to collect them, to put them into collections. I remember asking my own Isaiah professor when I took Isaiah in college, you get all these, how did people ever receive these messages? When were they declared, and he said it was probably around, the well, the watering well, people are coming to get water and they're declaring these messages, or, maybe people are, at the city gate and they're declaring these messages, and these prophets have received these messages from the Lord, and they're they're reporting probably over and over again to different groups of people. They're declaring these words that they've received from the Lord. A lot of times, one of the things that in times past was always confusing to me is when you read through a book like Isaiah, the first 4 chapters, you go from the wickedness of Judah, the unfaithful city, and then you get into chapter 2, and it's the mountain of the Lord and this glorious picture of a future, and then you've got the day of the Lord, and people are getting their butts kicked, and the judgment on Judah and in Jerusalem, and then in chapter 4, the branch of the Lord is glorified, and it's you kind of get these. It goes from doom and gloom to hope, and doom and gloom and hope, and doom and gloom and hope, and they're just back and forth. It's like, well, is this a bad thing, a good thing? What's going on? And it helps me to remember that these were messages, sermons, if you will, that these prophets were declaring, and then they got brought into a collection. And just like we talk about the Song of Solomon, and it's an anthology of love songs. Well, though they're put together in a way where there's a movement in there. In the same way, a book like Isaiah is an anthology of prophetic messages. And no doubt they're put together in a way, too, where there's some movement. It's not a haphazard arrangement of these messages. But, you can imagine that in one setting, he's declaring about the wickedness of Judah. He's declaring a message of doom and gloom. And then in another setting, maybe it's years later, maybe it's 10 years later, he's trying to encourage the people with a word of hope, about what the future would bring. You've got a dejected people, and he's delivering a message of hope. You've got a proud people, who've forgotten God, and you've got a message of doom and gloom, just like we preach, every week. Sometimes you're given a message of hope, and sometimes it's a message of warning. And so that's what's going on here. And so if you try to read, this is what I did, when I was a younger Christian. If you try to read Isaiah like a narrative, and you're expecting it to move sequentially and in time, chronologically, it's just going to be really frustrating. But when you understand that these are prophetic messages, poems, if you will, that have been put together, and you're reading individual poems, well, that, now I can understand a little better, and it makes a little bit more sense.
Because sometimes it's just hard to, like in chapter 3, it says, it starts off with, for behold, he's referring to the thing before, so stuff like the beach.
Yeah, for sure. And we get a little help with the headings there, but those aren't, obviously weren't there in Hebrew. So that's a good question. It's maybe not always clear when a new message has begun. Yeah.
I haven't really thought about the difference between the writing prophets before. I'm like, oh yeah, they didn't really write down what Elijah said.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
It'd be interesting to hear.
Yeah, for sure. He was
Besides,
busy calling down fire on people to write anything down.
Doing really cool stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. You just never sit and think about the differences, but you don't at the same time. I mean, I don't think anyway. Isaiah and Jeremiah and everyone, they're not doing like crazy miraculous stuff.
Yeah.
In the same way.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
they're doing some.
I don't know of any
normal
miracles.
things.
Yeah. And that's where, we've had obviously at RCC, we've had lots of conversations about healing and miracle. One of the things that point out to people is that we read about it in the Old Testament, and it seems like it was happening all the time. But a lot of it's centered around a couple of guys, Elijah and Elisha, and it's centered around specific periods of history. The Bible covers thousands of years, and these miracles that we see happening all the time.
You're seeing a
They're 1
year,
40
right,
year
exactly.
gap
there.
And even then, through the lives of a couple of guys, not through everybody in the nation, every believer or anything. So I think sometimes we can just get a wrong perspective of history.
Yeah, you look at, just like we looked at the miracles of Elisha and all that stuff. It's like, if you see whatever, let's say 20 or 17 or 25 miracles, and then you think about, oh, that was like 30 years. Or whatever.
Yeah, right.
Sure, there were more.
Yeah.
You know, just like it says at the end of John, and there are more that happened to Jesus' life that can be written down. But still, you know, we see like, and obviously, I'm the farthest thing from a cessationist, but
Yeah.
being realistic,
Mm-hmm.
you know. I think just thinking through the issue, you know, it's like, it wasn't like he was walking around making crazy stuff happen. Maybe he was.
Yeah, and I would use those arguments to just push people a little bit on, that such a common, how come in America we don't see any miracles? It must be because none of us have faith. Well, somebody in America has faith, and we do see some miracles, but just to say, well, it's not like everybody in Israel saw miracles either. Of course, Jesus, the Son of Man, he came and there were miracles, and his apostles, which, he appointed and gave authority and started a new era. Those are special periods in history. And I, of course, believe in miracles, believe in healing, want to see it more and more, want to see it through our church or our churches. But there's
at the Bethlehem conference, because we went to that, and then I took the class that, the elective class, I guess, for that. And, in the end, after I read the 4 views or, read it all, it seemed like at Bethlehem and the way it was presented or the way people do, it's like you either need to be all in on this or basically you might as well be a cessationist type of thing.
Sure.
Like you really need to believe that the Spirit can do all this and will and
to blow up the cautious charismatic.
Exactly. It seemed like it was blowing up the cautious charismatic, but when I did my research and I was fully expecting to be on one side or the other, my logic said, charismatic, or my logic said we don't need some of these things anyway. But on the other end, I was like, I can't refute that the New Testament doesn't stop, these gifts either. And I ended up, through very careful study to me, it just made the most sense logically that I think the cessationist and the cautious view both stated what you said, where in history, in the Old Testament history, there were extreme gaps between all of these. There were a lot of gaps between these big miraculous times. And day to day in the church, it wasn't like every week we should expect like this huge miracle. Even in the New Testament, it was even somewhat spread out. Sure. It wasn't like every day, every week thing. So we just see glimpses and pictures even throughout.
Yeah.
And they shared there were certain. So I ended up being in the cautious. I'm like in the open but cautious. View, and like not in a way that's like I'm just afraid to be, that. But I think there's some validity to that view. Not saying there can't be validity to other views because I'm still very open, but there is some validity to saying we should desire it, but we shouldn't necessarily expect it to the degree that a specific time period had it, because God can work. It might happen in 10 years like that, and it might not happen at all like that.
Or location. Just whatever God's doing.
God brings
what I mean?
Yeah. When revival comes, it's God.
Yeah, I mean, there's little places we will never even know of, little churches, and crazy stuff's happening. And it'll never be published anywhere. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's just, we have no.
Too.
All right, well, prophetic gestures is the next blank. Just kind of give you a phrase for a truth you've probably already picked up on, that these prophets use prophetic gestures a lot, right? And you already noted that Isaiah walked around naked.
Oh, yeah. I was wondering what do you mean?
Yeah, they use symbols. And, you think about Ezekiel, laying on his side for 390 years and turning over for another, or 390 days, turning over for another 40 years. Burying underwear, or, Ezekiel was made mute, he couldn't even talk, and that was a prophetic gesture. Or, Jeremiah's day, you would wear a yoke around it, right? And one of the false prophets came along and broke his wooden yoke and said, no, Babylon's not going to put us in bondage or whatever. And he said, well, in the place of the wooden yoke, there's going to be an iron yoke. They use lots of gestures. And, as expository preachers, we can sometimes be down on any video or props or anything like that. And I don't use that stuff much at all. But at the same time, unless we're at camp, then maybe. But at the same time, the prophets use that kind of stuff to engage their listeners, and so it's not necessarily wrong. Sometimes we might use them in gimmicky ways that would seem wrong, but they definitely tried to arrest the attention of the people they were speaking to by their actions. The relationship to imperial policy kind of they could be they sometimes were a part of the royal court. Maybe Isaiah was probably close to the king, relative of the king. They could be a part of the temple personnel, serving at the temple, and sometimes they were just a common man. You think about Amos, who was a dresser of sycamore figs, and so prophets could come from different places and have different relationships to the king. At the best, the prophets were speaking truth to the king oftentimes, or to the whole, not just to the king, but it could be to the whole population. And so they're delivering the word of God. In times past, you think about Nathan, even Elijah, Elisha, they're dealing more directly with the king. A lot of times they're writing prophets, you don't see them as much having the personal relationship with the king, but speaking to the whole population. They're not supposed to be, Donald Trump will line up pastors like Robert Jeffries and others, and he's trying to get validity for his policies by trying to get pastors on his side. And of course, that's the way it worked with the false prophets in Israel too, where the king would provide the food for the prophets, and the prophets would support his imperial policies. And that's not the way prophets are supposed to work. That's not the way pastors are supposed to work. They're not supposed to be, cozying up to presidents and politicians and trying to support their policies. They're supposed to be proclaiming the word of God and to culture and to leaders and to everybody. And so, thinking about prophets a little bit. Let's see. The three major periods of turmoil are, you guys already know this by now, but the Assyrian crisis, the Babylonian crisis, and then the post-exilic crisis, which was a crisis of identity. Who are we now that the temple's been destroyed?
Again, sorry.
Yeah,
I was trying to find the question. I was like,
the Assyrian crisis. You think about the Assyrians, the Syro-Ephraimite War, they were a part of that, and they're threatening the northern kingdom. So lots of prophecy, Amos, Hosea, Micah, Isaiah, is surrounded by the Assyrian crisis. And then the Babylonian crisis, Isaiah, of course, deals with that too, since it stretches out a long time. And then the post-exilic period. This crisis of identity, and you think about Haggai and Zechariah, we've talked about them promoting the rebuilding of the temple, even though the people had stopped the building. Or Obadiah, Malachi, or other ones.
This might be an off question, but what should our view or idea be like? So if I'm reading through and reading about the northern kingdom being threatened, so to speak.
Yeah.
When I read it from my perspective, I'm like, that's a good thing because the northern kingdom is pretty terrible. And the southern kingdom is like real Israel anyway. Should I view it that way? Like the idea that northern kingdom is not even, as far as I'm concerned, they seceded from the legit Israel.
Yeah. I don't think so. I think, God didn't forget the northern kingdom. God sent prophets to the northern kingdom. Elisha and Elijah were prophets to the northern kingdom. When I was reading, I wish I could recall a little bit. I was reading just today in the Kings, talked about God hadn't forgotten his people in the northern kingdom. So I don't think we should root for the downfall of the northern kingdom.
Because when I hear Assyrian crisis, and then I'm thinking of the Syro-Ephraimite War.
Yeah.
I'm also thinking of the Assyrians teaming up with, Judah, and I'm like, okay, like this is a good thing because those Ephraimites are those Syrians must be trouble, and Israel's just, or Judah is just getting some help. Like that's just it's not a good perspective, I don't know, and that's what I'm saying. Like I'm just looking to get fresh eyes on how I should.
Yeah, I don't think we're rooting for a home team when it comes to the Northern and Southern Kingdom. We want both of them to repent. We want both of them to be delivered and rescued. We want God. He talks about the two sticks being united, which they were. And eventually, the two kingdoms are united through Jesus, through the gospel. And so, yeah, I don't think we want to root.
So it's like even though Judah and the Southern Kingdom had generally better kings, or generally were seeking the Lord a little more, you'd say, regardless, we should be like, why are you fighting type of thing? Like, you should be in peace, like, you should be one, you should be Israel. That type of perspective.
Yeah.
God's people.
I guess.
Repent.
I maybe have to think through it a little more because, when Jehoshaphat, built ships with Ahaziah, the Lord destroyed them at Ezion-Geber. He didn't want Jehoshaphat building ships with Ahaziah. When Jehoshaphat went to war with Ahab at Ramoth Gilead, Ahab ends up dead, and the Syrians win. God didn't want them going into cahoots. And so, while, it seems like the ideal would be for them to be, it seems like God wasn't really wanting his kings to be the agents of, allying with each other. And so, I suppose in a different universe, God could have found a way to unite them together.
At the time, it wasn't time for them.
Yeah.
He said with the gospel, we be united. We're supposed to be united.
They're both still God's people regardless, but it just wasn't time for them to unite. So that's what you're saying.
I guess.
Challenging. Well, just when I read it, we have these ways we read it.
I just think God didn't forget his people. I mean, he sent Jehu to wipe out Baal worship, worship of Asherah. Yeah.
Oh, that's helpful. I appreciate it.
Cool. So I think these three big things, these three activities, periods of turmoil, that's what all the prophets revolve around. And so I think there are things that we should teach our people. They should know about those three things. Otherwise, they're never going to understand any significant comprehension of the meaning. We'll skip the next one. It's not that important. 3 views of Isaiah. I think you guys have that already. Single authorship, Deutero, Isaiah, Trito Isaiah. Of course, like I think you guys, I fall in the first camp, single authorship. First half of Isaiah, it has Assyrian dominance in view. Of course, this is why people see a Deutero Isaiah. Think that after after chapter 39, it must be a different author. It has Babylonian exile in view in the second half. And exile, the first one is Assyrian dominance. The second one is Babylonian exile. So after the deed has been done and the Babylonians have destroyed Judah, the picture is that of Judah being restored in a great future that would come to them one day. Let's see. Isaiah's ministry began during the reign of who? Did you guys pick up on that? King Uzziah, which is tradition says is his cousin. It continued through Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, and probably into Manasseh's reign. And so he had a really long run. Manasseh may have killed him. Tradition says that he was killed by being sawn into. Hebrews, it seems like, probably has Isaiah in mind when it talks about the great saints of old being sawn to. Let's see. Yeah, the oracles or woes against nations primarily had Israel in view, Israel meaning Israel as the intended audience. And so when you get a woe against Edom. That's not necessarily like Isaiah's trying to stick it to the Edomites. And it's kind of like, look, Israelites, this is what Edom has coming to them. And so when you read that, you can read it through the eyes of an Israelite. How would this have been an encouragement to them? Well, I think this is kind of just maybe a helpful thing. That the next one is Lucifer. Is a transliteration of Isaiah 14:12. This is kind of a small point, but you hear the phrase Lucifer sometimes, as a reference to Satan. We could go to Isaiah 14:12 real quick. Otherwise I can just read it. But it's Israel's remnant taunts Babylon is the English title here. When the Lord has given you rest from your pain and turmoil and hard service with which you were made to serve, you will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon. And so it's sticking it to the king of Babylon now. And verse 12, how you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. How you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. Above the stars of God, I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. Those who see you will stare at you and ponder over you. Is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms? And on and on and on. And so, sometimes we read Satan into that. And Lucifer just means day star, or morning star. It's Venus is I think Venus is the. I have to look back now. Okay, I have it here. The shining one, Venus, I think is another translation of shining one. And so when you think of Lucifer as Satan's name, it's not really the name the Bible gives. That's just what he's called because people associate verse 12 with Satan. Or day star is the transliteration. Lucifer is the transliteration of that. Now, probably most scholars would say this really isn't about Satan at all. This is really just hyperbole for the king of Babylon. Probably a lot of evangelicals would read this and say, no, that's not talking about the king of Babylon. That's really talking about Satan. Wayne Grudem, he says, this is talking about the king of Babylon, but the language does get so high and exalted here that it seems to go beyond a human king. And this may be a reference to Satan himself, like, the king of Babylon, being kind of a type here of Satan. So you guys can make your own judgment.
We read types of Christ in a lot of things.
Yeah.
And just based off clear language that it sounds like.
Yeah. You read Isaiah 53 or Psalm 22, and it's like, well, this seems to go beyond anything that David really experienced, and it's pretty clear it's talking about Jesus. And so it may be talking about Satan there. I know probably some of our Satanology, this is a big part of when we talk about Satan, wanting to be better than God. A lot of that's probably coming from this. Yeah.
This is the only place that the Lucifer comes from?
Yep. Yeah. All right, we don't have much time left. I'm sorry, I'm so bad at managing time. Even talk about Proverbs, but we could rifle through. You guys have spent a little bit of time on talk about the Syro-African War. Let's see if you guys can fill it in real quick. To counter what dominance? Two countries formed an alliance.
Syrian. Okay.
Not Syrian, but what? Assyria, yeah, Assyrian, which is confusing But those are two different nations, Assyria and Syria. So to counter Assyrian dominance, these two countries formed an alliance. And the first country that starts with an S is what? Syria, yeah. So these are two distinct countries.
I did the opposite, which was.
Oh, sure. Yeah, well, you could think of, we have a modern day Syria. So you could, and it's not that big of a country, it's, bigger than Israel, but, it's not ginormous. And so you can think, and it's north of Israel, it's the same land. So if that helps you to remember. Assyria covered a huge, it's remarkable that in those days without the internet that they could govern such a ginormous land. It's Iraq, Iran, Turkey, Jordan, dominant over Syria, Israel. So it was an empire, yeah. It's incredible how big. And somebody was really smart at administration to be able to pull it off.
I just put that Syria, and then I put Judah and Assyria on the right side, which obviously just is. I had the right allies, I guess, but the wrong people in dominance.
Yeah, well, it's Syria, and then the second one is
Northern Kingdom.
Israel. Yep, the Northern Kingdom of Israel. So these two guys, Israel and Syria, the Northern Kingdom, they are gathering together to counter the dominance. Capital city of Damascus. I just said it. Capital of Israel, Samaria. How about the rulers of these two kingdoms? Have you gotten that down?
Yes.
Okay.
Is this the Reb Sheka guy?
No.
Remember?
Yeah, Reb Sheka. Yeah, that pops up in Israel. That's the Rezin.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
And then the next king, Pekah. Yep. Reb Sheka was the Assyrian. When they went, we're not going to get to it, but
Hezekiah.
Yep. Hezekiah is a cool guy. So Aram and Ephraim, those are alternatives. So the kings of those two countries wanted Judah. Yep, I think you said that, Zach. Judah to enter into an alliance, but you guys know the king by now, right? Ahaz refused. So they attacked Judah in order to depose King Ahaz and to replace him with King, anyone know this one? I haven't really talked about it. Tabeel, T-A-B-E-E-L. So they want to put kind of their own puppet king in place who will be friendly to them. And so they're attacking King Ahaz. And then you guys know Isaiah declared to King Ahaz of Judah not to worry about the two kings or smoldering stumps of firebrands. And their countries would be destroyed in, I think it was 65 years. I'm forgetting some of the details now, but probably how long it took Syria to. Ahaz refused to sign. You guys know that. You guys know Emmanuel is the child. So the child, before he was old enough to know right from wrong, probably going to place that age at like 13 maybe, because that would place from 735 when the Syro-Ephraimite War was taking place to 722 BC when the Northern Kingdom was destroyed. The land of the two kings would be deserted. It would be so deserted there'd be no cultivation of crops, but that it would be conducive to grazing livestock, foraging for food, so that the boy would eat curds and honey. It's always really confusing, when it talks about the boy eating curds and honey. But, that's a way to say the land's deserted. They're not cultivating crops, but you've got a goat and you've got honey that maybe not made out of from bees, but it's maybe like fruit from trees or whatever. But you're foraging for food is the idea. So that's not really a blessing to be eating curds and honey. That means you're not able to And then that was fulfilled. Yeah, it's 7:22. Where's my? I want to get this wrong. I think yeah, 7:22 BC. I think is the right answer there. Jackson walked us through Alma.
Alma?
Yeah, is the word, and then Betula, and then Parthenos. And I guess we better stop right there. Maybe we'll get to it more. Just so much in the Old Testament. To review and get it mastered takes time, and then to get fresh content takes time. So.
Every class I take, it's like I just really wish you could take it twice.
I know it. Yeah.
Start over. Like just completely start over and just do it again.
That's the way I feel about teaching the class, because I forget so much over 2 years, and then I know it all again by the end, and have to refresh myself.
You should just make a compiled list of all these things in order. Just after we're done with the class, you open them up to us.
Yeah.
So we can take them forever.
That would be a good idea. Organize it a little bit, have a file, but I will consider that. Get to it. Well, we better close. Jim, do you want to pray for us?
You cut out. What did you say?
Can you pray?
Yeah. Yep. Father, thanks again for this time together. Thanks for sustaining us for 4 hours and beyond, and in learning these things and understanding these things. We also thank you for the fellowship with other believers, that we become closer as a group and closer to you. Pray your protection on each of us as we go forward. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right, we're dismissed, and it's still 9:30, so we did it.
Beautiful.
Reminds me of Dora the Explorer. When you get kids.
Dora the Explorer, we're kind of out of that stage. See,
Yeah.
I'm sure our girls would love it, but
We haven't watched Dora in a long time. I just don't like it.
I hate Dora.
I hate it. It's so boring. Like, I have to find a cartoon that I can sit there and watch with her at least, that isn't like making me want to ram my head against the wall.
Strawberry Shortcake is my least.
But Boo loves Dora. We just don't watch it.
I can't wait to have an excuse to watch